session, which will be the class session, and we will treat it as such because I'm going to need your feedback extensively to make this work appropriately. By way of sort of just housekeeping types of things, if you missed any of the weekend series, especially if you had young children and you wanted to be here but you had sick kids, those things are posted up on the website. If you're not sure how to find them, you can talk to Brian. He can point you in the right direction as well. But if you want to hear any of the other lessons from Friday or Saturday, that's where they are already at. Greg's actually posted up here in a bit as well, but the ones from the weekend should already be up if you're interested in seeing those. So we're going to look at some applications of the different things we've been talking about. We've looked a lot at this is how these things ought to be, or this is what the Scripture says about X, Y, Z. Greg did some application of what those principles might look like, right? What does it look like to not provoke your children to wrath, for example? But we haven't done a lot of, all right, very practically, how do I do this, right? What does this mean? How do I execute X, Y, Z? And so that's what we're going to try and do and talk about a little bit. Now, one thing that I thought about when I was trying to get ready for this is I was thinking back over, the examples of families that we see in the Bible. And there's a lot of them that you find, especially in the Old Testament. And it's kind of sobering because there's a lot of families where there's just lots of problems. I mean, as you go back and you find all these people, these leaders, these examples, these heroes of faith, we sometimes call them, they have messed up families. They have messed up spousal relationships. There is lots of problems with fathers and then children going off in a different sort of way. I mean, it starts at the beginning, right? You have the very first family and a brother murders the other one. I mean, that's problematic, right? And then the one that's still alive gets thrown out and you're never seen again or wanders around, right? And you just kind of keep going down through it. Abraham has problems with Sarah, and they decide to bring in another woman to try and fulfill the promise of God, and that leads to harsh feelings all around, and his son getting expelled and thrown out. I mean, it's just on and on and on. David has these issues with his children that come up after him. Eli, he's the priest, right, the judge, and his children are a mess. And then Samuel gets to give that message. And then what happens with his kids? They're a mess. I mean, it's just on and on and on. So we should really kind of take this issue fairly seriously into how we react and how we think about it. Because if all those people had those kinds of problems, it means it's not as easy as we might think that it is. So we just kind of need to keep that in mind. So what I'm going to do is we're going to look at some of these passages that were brought up. All right, so we're going to try this out here, Brian. I'm clicking and sliding and writing and all kinds of things, so we'll see how this goes. We're going to look at some of these passages we've already looked at, and what I want us to do is kind of pull them apart just a little bit. Don't have a whole lot of time to do this, but look and see what they say, and then we're going to try and just say, all right, so based on what it's telling us there, how do we do? I mean, give me examples practically of what does it look like to whatever it says. So the first one there that we have is Ephesians 5. We've looked at this a lot, but talking about husbands and just looking at their piece for a minute. We're looking at husbands, wives, fathers, mothers, children. But looking at husbands there in Ephesians chapter 5, 25 to 33. If we're looking at that section there, does someone want to read those verses there for us, 5, 25 to 33? Go ahead, Patrick.
Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her, so that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, that he might present to himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she would be holy and blameless. So husbands ought also to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church, because we are all members of his body. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother, and shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is great, but I am speaking with reference to Christ and the church. Nevertheless, each individual among you also is to love his own wife, even as himself, and the wife must see to it that she respects her husband.
Okay, so as we look at those sections of verses there, and just look at, there's a little bit of direction on wives, and there's some stuff about the church, but if we're just going to peel in and try and find out what does it tell husbands to do and how they relate to their wives, what are the different actions, if you will, that they're told to do? What are those things? Good, we have nourish and cherish. We're going to see if you can make this work. Nourish. How'd that come out? Not too bad. Well, that's my handwriting, though. That's what I actually, yeah. So that's a fairly accurate representation, actually, of my writing. So we have that it's supposed to nourish and cherish them, right? So nourish, and we'll put cherish as well. Cherish. We have cherish. The S is a little weird. There we go. Gave himself up. Gave himself. I'll let you know as well, Vernon, if you want to do this. There's also a typing feature. You can type it as well. So if you're not comfortable writing, you can give that a go as well. He gave himself. What else do we see? We got nourished, cherished. He gave himself. He's sanctified, right? So we have sanctify. Sanctify. There we go. What else? Love. There we go. Someone said that at least finally. That's good. Got to get that one up there. And there's some qualifiers on that. There's two different qualifiers. One of them is as Christ loved the church, and the other qualifier is what? As he loves his own body or loves his own flesh, right? So that's the other one we've got there. So we got nourish, we've got cherish, we got sanctify, we got love, and we have that he gave himself. Those are basically the 5 that you can find in there in that section on how husbands are to treat their wives, right? Now, most of those are pretty self-explanatory, but we'll look at them a little bit if we need to. So when we think about, let's start in the order they're listed. If we look at love your wives as Christ loved the church, husbands, how do you do that? Or wives, tell us what that looks like to you. How do you know when you are being loved as Christ loved the church? And then husbands, you should be writing these things down. So what does it look like to love your wife as Christ loved the church? Or wives, tell us, what does that look like? Go ahead, Tammy. Okay, so there's this idea which starts to tie in a little bit to this gave himself piece, right? In fact, those two are kind of put together, right? When you see them in the verse, it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her, right? Those things are kind of connected. So there's this idea that loving your wife involves giving of yourself, okay? That involves some kind of sacrifice in demonstrating your care, right? There's going to have to be some of that. Now, that's going to look different for different women, I suspect, right? What is considered a sacrifice by your wife, and men, that's not your call. Right? I mean, it's real nice for me to say, oh, I gave up so much for you because I didn't do X, Y, Z. Well, if I didn't like those things anyway, that doesn't count as a sacrifice, right? So I'd like to be able to tell you, oh, don't do this, but if you don't like that, like I could say, I'll pick on Patrick a little bit because this is something that we don't have in common, right? Like I could say, oh yeah, I sacrifice golf to spend time with my wife. That's not a sacrifice for me because I don't golf anyway, right? Now, if Patrick did it, that's a sacrifice. Does that make sense, right? That's going to be a huge sacrifice, but it's not a sacrifice for me, right? So I can't say, oh yeah, I make that sacrifice for my wife. I don't. I don't like that anyway, okay? What else does this look like? These things tied together, this loving her or this giving of themselves, which kind of go together. I mean, what does that look like to you, wives? How do you know when your husband is giving himself up for you?
I like the love languages, and we each have different love language that means more to us. I mean, they're all real good, but like for me, words of affirmation are real important. So Don does that really well. So that's really important to me, to feel loved and cherished. I need to be built up a lot.
Good.
And that might get tiring for a man, but when it's important to your wife, you need to do it, and whatever her love language is.
Yeah, if you've not read that book, again, that's another book that's hasn't been mentioned, but it's a good book if you're trying to look at, how do people experience love? It's in different types of ways. Melissa is very similar in that she likes to be affirmed. She wants me to say nice, affirming things to her. And in our case, that is me giving of myself because I don't like to do that. It's not easy for me to just be, oh, let me tell you nice things. I mean, just in general, right? It's not just Melissa. I mean, that's just not the way I operate. And so that's something I have to say, I can do one of two things. I can say, I'm just not good at that, and that's just not who I am, and so I just can't do that for you. Or I can say, I'm going to make the sacrifice, I'm going to be uncomfortable, and I'm going to do that to demonstrate that I love you. And that may be a number of different things for different women. So women, you need to tell your husband what it is that makes you feel loved, okay? Because you could wait and expect that they'll figure it out. You can do that, okay? But the better approach is just to tell them and save everyone the trouble. Okay? It's just the better approach because they're never going to figure it out and you're fighting a silly battle there about if he really loved me, he'd know. No, he won't. Just tell him. And it has nothing to do with that he doesn't love you. He just doesn't know. It's one of these differences between men and women, right? I don't know what you want unless you tell me. I think that's scriptural, by the way, right? No one knows what's in a man besides the spirit that's in the man, except that he tells and reveals it to us, right? That's right. Men don't know unless you tell us what it is that's in a man. Okay, so if you've got more of these, that's good too. But what do some of these other ones look like? Sanctify is an interesting idea, if we're sort of looking at them in order. Sanctify, in the church meant a very specific thing, that he sort of set that apart. Now, it means the same kind of thing here if I'm talking about my wife, right? I've got to set her apart. And so what that means is I've got to understand or know how it is that she is special, right? And not just that she's special, but how. What is it that makes her different than other women, both in how you treat her and act towards her, and in that interaction that you have? And that's some of this thing of, whatever Sherry might like may not be what Melissa likes. And so I can't say, well, this works for John and Sherry, so I'm going to go ahead and just run with that, even though that doesn't work for us, because she's different. She's set apart. She's her own. Okay, so how does that look, though? What are some things I can do that show my wife that she is set apart, that she's different and special from all the other women that I interact with in my life? And I interact with a lot. I'm in education. It's a female-dominated field. What do I do for my wife that's different than that? I need to know what she likes and dislikes, right? I better find out those things, okay? Now, again, women, feel free to tell us what your likes or dislikes are. Tell your husbands that. But husbands, this one's easier for you to figure out, right? Those things that she does all the time, unless she's doing things she doesn't like because she has to. But when she has free time, what does she choose to do, right? What does she like? What are her interests? If you say, go do whatever you want, I've got the kids today, what will she choose to do? Figure those out. Know hers, okay?
I think you need to also give her preference. When you're in a room and there's several people there, if you're giving another woman more preference than you're giving her, you need to show her that honor and preference, that she's more important to you than any other woman in the world, really. Because you chose her and she's set apart to you and she needs to feel that way.
Yeah, that's an important idea, especially with women. We did this class, some of the younger marrieds, not that long ago, and looked at this Love and Respect book. And out of that class, I don't remember how it was, but I think Rochelle sort of said it, is that you need to tell your woman that she's the hottest girl in this place, right, or the most beautiful woman in the place, right? I mean, that's what she needs to understand, that she's the most beautiful person that's here. Right? If she says, oh, tonight, what did you think of? Oh, you're the most beautiful woman there. Right? That's what she needs to feel and understand. And you do that not in just saying it, but also in, what did you do the whole time you were wherever you were? Did you ignore her and pay attention to these other women? Or did you pay attention to her? Right? That's how you sanctify and set her apart. Joyce?
Another way is, especially for, I think, the younger guys, is you owe your mother respect and honor and diligence, but when it comes to weighing opinions, your wife's opinion and feelings on a matter should have special weight with you.
Yeah, there is an idea here, right? And it's even quoted in here, right, that a man will leave his father and his mother, right, and he'll cling to his wife. And sometimes, especially, it seems like this is more and more of an issue as we move on here, that men have a hard time leaving their mother. I mean, they may leave her, but it's still, if it comes down to mom versus wife, right, there's a lot of too many husbands that say, well, I got to help my mom out here, right? I've got to deal with this thing over you instead. Or, well, mom thinks this, even though you think that. I'm going to lean this way. That's not setting your wife apart, right? Your mom sort of is a woman, and she counts in that. You're setting her apart from all the rest. Your wife should be special. I know you've got like 900 more, right? But we only have 26 minutes, and I'd like to get some of the other ones as well. You're free as much as you want to jot these down, though, and give them to your husbands. Okay? My guess is if your husband is anything like I am, he won't mind getting a list of, here's the thing. Because, again, all I want is just tell me what the right answers are here. Let's cut through all the guessing. Just tell me, and then I'll do those things, okay? If I need to know what they are. As we think about it, there's one other verse I want us to look at real quick. It's the Colossians verse, which is Colossians 3:19. And if I think about what that verse says, Colossians 3:19, if someone's got it, we can just read it for us here. Anyone got it already? 3:19.
Husbands, love your wives and do not be embittered against them.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea there too, right? What's the one sort of new piece there? Don't be bitter against them, or do not be embittered towards them. Husbands, has that ever happened where you feel bitter towards your wife? The question is, how do we clear that? Right? How do I, if I feel bitter towards my wife, how do we resolve that issue? You just mock her.
No, the reality is, and we've been talking about this all weekend, you need to accept she's made different.
Sure.
And she's going to change her mind. She's going to feel insecure. She's going to see things differently. She's going to be emotional. So all those things to a guy, if you want to sit down with a guy and have a discussion and he starts crying, now there's no excuse for that. But for a woman, there is. So you just need to say that's reality.
Yeah, so part of this is you've got to just live with her in an understanding way, right? You have to understand that that's the way that she is, and don't let those things become bothersome to you, right? Sort of the second piece about that is, if there's things where it's not just the differences between men and women, right? If your wife does or says something that makes you feel bitter against them, you got sort of two choices, right? What are your two choices there? Yeah, you can just sit on it and get mad at them, right? You can do that. That's option one. Or you can talk to them about it, right? You can bring that up and say, look, this is what I'm feeling here. And again, men, your wives are generally going to appreciate that because they want to be communicated with. Now, they may not take it as well as you'd like. Okay, but again, that's the woman thing, right? When women have problems, they like to get together and talk them out and cry over them and whatever it. Just understand that's what you're in for. When you say, look, I'm feeling this way because of how you treated me or what you said or whatever. And I don't want to become embittered toward you, so I'm telling you this so we can work this out. Now, again, you need to sort of have that approach as opposed to, well, you made me mad because X, Y, Z. That's not going to fly. That's not going to work as well. But if you say, right, look, I'm feeling embittered and I don't want to feel that way, so this is how I'm feeling. You have a much better success rate there than just saying, I'm going to ignore it, or I'm going to just tell you, you made me mad because of this. That's probably not going to work either. Or fight over it. Yeah, that's not the best approach there. Okay? So, but it's an important thing we have to think about. That, we always go to Ephesians, but this is something different here, right? Don't become embittered towards them. All right, let's move on to wives because we don't have a whole lot of time. Yep, go for it.
The thing that makes somebody the most frustrated about somebody is typically the quality that they appreciate the most.
Sure.
And if we remember that goes a long way, no matter who it is and whatever the relationship. But with our wives, the thing that will frustrate us is whatever it is that we love about her, when it's working in our favor, we love it. But when it goes the other way, it's frustrating.
Sure.
But remember, that's the quality that you do love.
Right.
I think that's helpful.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example here from our own experience, is that the thing that will make me annoyed when Melissa and I are engaged in different things is when she does like 12 different things and doesn't finish any of them, right? She starts this one, and then she goes to that one, and then she moves on to this one, and I go, why didn't you finish it? Well, because I'm doing, right? And when it's not working in my favor, then it bothers me, right? Now, all the other times, when I find out, oh, all of these things got done today, right? I mean, all of these things got finished, then I'm more than happy to appreciate that quality, right? But when it's not working out the one thing I wanted done, then I'm like annoyed, right? And that's kind of what Vernon is saying there, that that's how that typically works. Let's look at wives real quick. So go back to Ephesians chapter 5. 22 through 24, someone read that for us. And then the very last phrase in verse 33 that applies to wives. Someone to get that for us there, Ephesians 5, 22, 23, 24, and the end of 33. Go ahead, Tammy.
Wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body. But as the church is subject to Christ, so also the wives ought to be to their husbands in everything. Nevertheless, each individual among you also is to love his own wife, even as himself, and the wife must see to it that she respects her husband.
Okay, what are the topics? What are the actions? What are the things that wives are told to do in those verses there? What have we got? She's got to submit. What else? She's got to respect. Anything else? Yeah, now there's some qualifiers on those subjects, right? There's this idea that you have to submit to him as to the Lord, right? So that's putting a certain quality to that submission. And then there's a scope of that submission, right? It's in all things. So those are kind of big modifiers on those ideas there, right? Okay, so when we think about that idea then of submitting as to the Lord and in all things, what does that look like? Yeah, that's kind of a big thing, okay? Now, husbands, when you think about that, you need to recognize or realize when she doesn't do that in some particular area or in some way, in some small detail, right? Before you get all upset about it, you need to ask yourself, how subject am I to Christ? Do I ever mess that up, right? And if there's places where, oh yeah, I messed that up, then that same grace that you expect that Christ is going to have toward you, you ought to have toward your wife. Let's understand that real quick, because that's the idea here, right? Is you're going to subject as the church does to Christ, or as you do to the Lord. So what does that mean, though? How do I do that? How do I demonstrate that as a wife? So wives, you can give us ideas you try, or husbands, what is it that your wife does that lets you know that she's attempting to do this? I'm sure if I ask, is your wife in subjection? Most of the men here say, oh yeah. If I say, how do you know? What does she do? How do you know that?
A major thing do if you have a disagreement about how to do something or how something should be done, and if she maybe expresses what she thinks about it, but then the husband decides that he thinks it's best, and it may not be what she thinks, but if she doesn't make him pay for it.
Yeah, one of the ways you do see this is when there is sort of disagreement on a topic, right? Now, wives, there's some things there. You know, there's a certain point where you're supposed to be a helper suitable. We'll look at that in just a second. And so part of that is you need to be that sort of sounding board and tell them, this is what I think, and this is how it ought to be, and this is what I would do. But at some point, if your husband says, look, that's not the route we're going to go, we're going to do this, then this is where this becomes clear, right? Do you say, okay, that's what we're going to do, and give all your effort to doing that, right? Or do you not? And then when it goes poorly, or if it goes poorly, you know, what's your response, right? The response should not be, I told you that was going to happen, right? Or we should have done, if we had only done it my way. That's not really subjecting ourselves as we would to Christ, right? I mean, that's not sort of how that goes. So that's one way we can sort of see that. And I will say I do appreciate that about Melissa. She'll say, look, he'll tell me when this is the way we're going to do it, then that's the way it's going to be. And she's more than happy to say, all right, we're going to go that direction and make that happen.
You know, a couple things I think I learned over the years is one of the best descriptions that helped me is that the husband is the head, the wife is the neck. I think
careful how they do things that actually end up bringing honor to their husbands and also accomplish the things that are good that they set out to do. So I think that's really good examples. For example, Esther didn't go in
Right.
yelling and screaming and demanding whatever she wanted from the king. She went about it in a very wise manner. And I think if we understand who our husbands are and how they make decisions, how they react to things, we have a lot of good influence on that if we pay attention to that.
Yeah, and so you're starting to bleed a little bit into this other idea here of respect, right? So if we think about respect and what does that look like, right? How do you demonstrate respect towards your husband? This is an area like women with love. It's going to look different to different men, right? What respect looks like or how that feels or what that means. And you need to figure that out. So men, if you have things that you say, this is what makes me feel respected, you should tell those to your wife. Look, these are the things that if you do will make me feel respected. Now that means you've got to sit down and figure those out, right? This is what makes me feel respected. And qualify them. These are them. And then say, here you go. If you did this, I would feel respected. And if she starts doing those things and then that's not making you feel respect, you need to reevaluate your list, right? You might think, oh, I want my wife to this, but that's not getting it done. Then you need to figure out what is it that makes you feel respect. And it can be a lot of different things. One of the things, again, early in our marriage that I told Melissa at some point was, look, everyone else gets nice, pleasant, made up, pretty Melissa, right? Because you go to work at the bank, and so you do yourself all up, and it's just happy, oh, it's great, right? It makes me feel disrespected if I don't get that person, right? That other people only get that person. That's something that makes me feel disrespected. It might be fake Melissa, right? Which means I'm telling you, stop being fake. Do that. Don't treat other people like that, right? If you're not going to treat me that way, you can either treat me that way or stop treating other people like that. Either way is good. But if and that's that idea though. It feels as though you're giving preference to other people, right? And so that makes me feel disrespected. And so you need to figure out what those things are. And again, women, ask your husbands. Now, husbands, you're all going to get in the car in 20 minutes, and your wife is going to ask you, what is it that makes you feel respected? This is coming, right? Because you're not going to ask her what makes you feel loved. You already forgot to do that. So you should start figuring out what's your answer to that question going to be, because she's going to ask. That's right. Yeah. So figure it out, right? Start thinking of some answers here. You might sort of jot some things down. I want to look real quick at Genesis 2, 18 to 22, because there's an interesting idea there, I think, that Vernon hit on a little bit in what he was talking about when he was talking to wives. Genesis 2, in verse 18 to 22, the whole thing's a little interesting or strange, the way God sets this up here, but I think he's trying to get a point across to the man and the woman, and that's probably why he does it. But in verse 18 it says, "The Lord God said, it's not good that man should be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him," or a helpmeet for him. "And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and he brought them to Adam to see what he would call them. And whatever he called them, every living creature, that was its name. And Adam gave names to all the cattle, the fowl of the air, and every beast of the field. But for him there was not found a helper suitable for him. And the Lord caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs, closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, he made a woman, and he brought her to the man." Now when you look at that story there's some interesting ideas that I think come out of that. First of all, what predicates the whole scenario here?
Bringing the animals in front, there's not one suitable for the man.
But even before that,
Not going to be alone.
yeah, God says it's not good that man should be alone, right? And his solution to that problem is to do what? Yeah, make a helper that's suitable for him. So women, part of this idea of being a helpmeet, right? Being a suitable helper was to solve a particular problem. And that particular problem was what? Being alone. That's whatever God did, whatever he made woman, it was the solution to the problem that it's not good for man to be alone. Okay? So when you think about that, especially if you have children, right? Especially if you have children. It's very easy for you to get caught up in sort of the mother role. And even though you're around, you're leaving your husband alone for long stretches of time. I mean, 12, 13, 14 years, you may be leaving your husband alone because you're wrapped up in what you're doing with your children. And remember, you were made because it wasn't good for man to be alone. That's an important idea there. And God made you to be a helper that was suitable for him. And then he did that interesting thing where he parades everything across in front of him, right? What's the indication there of why God did that?
Why he created everything?
Yeah.
So you get the message. These aren't good enough.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't just because God said, oh, these things need names. I'm going to give them something to do before I get the woman, because otherwise they won't get anything done after that. The idea was, you need to see all these things come across and recognize and realize that none of these things are good enough. Now, part of that is this animal sort of thing, but I think what God is trying to get the message across is that the world out there, whatever that is, right, all of the world, that you're supposed to have dominion over, but none of it is going to solve your problem of being alone. So, women, if you're not solving that problem, man is going to go try and find a way to fill the aloneness with the world. And the problem is, that's not going to work. That was the whole exercise in saying, here's everything, none of it's suitable. Right? That's the point. That was your primary function, was to solve that problem. It's interesting the way God sets that up.
You know, what's interesting about this story is, you know, God, as God in his infinite wisdom, I don't believe that God created man and then later...
Right, figured it out. Oh, man.
He's alone. He needs someone.
Right.
God knew this right from the very beginning. And like was mentioned, you know, he created these animals in front of Adam, and Adam, you know, none of them were suitable.
Right.
And so then God created woman. But this was all planned from the very beginning. Woman wasn't a second,
right,
an afterthought.
No. Yeah, it's not. It wouldn't make any sense for God to say, I made male and female of all these other kinds of things, right? And I forgot to do that with humans, and then I thought, oh man, I need to do that, right? It's demonstrating a particular message or lesson that he wants humans to understand about how this goes, right? Which again is interesting, because with the animals, he just made them male and female. And it seems that the only reason God made them male and female was for what purpose? To multiply and fill the earth, right? That's a directive he gives to man and woman. But he sort of sets it up in an interesting way first, because there's something else besides just that he's trying to get them to understand, which is interesting. We have children, and since Greg did a really good job on what children's roles are here, we'll just sort of mention them real quick, right? In those verses, Ephesians 6, 1 and 2, there's really two things. Or what are the two things? Obey and respect, honor them. Yep, that's the two things that children are supposed to do. Now, children, you should write these down, right, or think about them. Parents, how do you know, what does it look like when your children are obeying and honoring? What do those things look like? I mean, and don't just say, oh, when I tell them to do something, they do it. Well, that's the simplest obey, yeah. But what's it look like to say your children are obedient and they are respectful or honoring you? How do you know that?
They're doing the right thing and you're not around.
Yeah, one of the big things that you know your children are obeying or obedient is when you've told them something previously, right? Some prior point, you give them some teaching, and then when you're not there or not around, they still do it anyway, right? That's sort of the sign of obedience, right? I mean, sure, you'll do it while I'm watching you. That doesn't mean that I'm obeying you. I'm just sort of complying, right? And as soon as you turn around, I'm going to do something else. That's not obedience. Obedience is when you continue to do it when I'm not even there, or without me even telling you, because you know that's what I've been told. I'm going to do it without being told again. What else is looked at honor and respect or obey? Go, Justin.
When they gather, you ask them their friends or other people around them who will maybe be here, comfortable with their friends, their friends
Sure, and that's part of this idea of obeying, and it's part of this idea even of honoring and respecting, right? When I have a choice between doing what my parents have told me to do or between what my friends are telling me I should do right now, which of these things do I pick? Right? Which of those things do I pick to do? Do I pick to do what my friends have told me to do or what's funny and what's going on right here, or do I pick to do what my parents have told me to do? That's what it looks like to obey and to respect. You got a follow-up there, Joyce?
Well, I was just thinking as a teacher.
Yeah.
Which students do, when you go into a parent conference, you
Right.
see which students respect their parents and which ones just obey when they're there.
That's right.
And then which have like absolutely.
Zero, it doesn't matter even there. Yeah, right.
I think a lot of it's the attitude in which a child does whatever it is they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
You know, that sets everything. It really does.
Yeah, part of this is a lot about how you do it, right? If you do it because I tell you 4 times and you do it begrudgingly and you are going to complain about it the whole time, and then when it's done, you're going to be like, oh, look at this great thing I did. That's not really demonstrating respect in any way. Every so often, and I just implemented this again today, I'll have to tell my children that, look, your only responses this week to any directive that you've been given by your mother, you have 3 choices. Three responses. That's it. You don't say anything else. Your only response is, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, or I need more information about that. If you honestly don't understand what she's requesting, then you may say, I need more information about that, so that then I can say, yes, ma'am, and go do that. Because sometimes you've got to just remind them that this is what it looks like to demonstrate respect, right? It's because you've gotten into a habit of saying, but Maddie, but Kelson. No, that's not respect. If you were told to do something, right, don't do what Adam did, right, which was, with the woman you gave me, right? That's not respect. That's not what it looks like. So keep that in your head there. Greg hit on this verse a little bit as well. It's kind of interesting when you look at this verse in what fathers in Ephesians 6:3, right? You've really got very few directives here, and that is strange, like Greg pointed out for Paul. It is very strange for Paul to sort of write in this way, where he just says, this is it. This is like all of that I've got for you here. When he says it, there's only a couple things, right? Don't provoke them. That's one. And then it's bring them up in the nurture or the training and then the admonition. You can look at those 2 separate things or one thing of the Lord. That's your task. That's your job. And as Greg kind of pointed out, whose job is that? Paul gives it to fathers. He says, this is your job. This is your task. This is what you have to do. You're not going to find another verse like that says, mothers, behave in this way. This is the father's job. This is your role as a father to your children. Okay, now, what's that look like? Greg gave us a lot of good things on what it looks like to provoke your children. Right? So don't do those things. I will tell you, fathers, you may have to sometimes step in with mothers and say, stop provoking your children as well, especially if you have mothers and daughters, because that seems to be a typical kind of scenario, right? Stop provoking your children, because that's what you're doing. But what's that look like? How do I make sure my children are brought up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord? What do I do? Okay. Sure. So the first thing that fathers you need to do is you need to check and make sure, am I demonstrating what the admonition of the Lord looks like? Am I following after what the teachings of the Lord are? If I'm not doing that, then it's going to be impossible for me to say, you should do this, right? You should behave in this way. Go ahead, Patrick. Do it. Jump in.
One of the things my father would say is people can tell what's important to you by what you spend your time and your money on.
Sure.
So the kids will see that too. What are you spending your time and your money on? If it's not spiritual, then they're not getting the instruction that they need.
Yeah, so if you couldn't hear that, Patrick's point is his dad used to tell him, you can tell what's important to a person by what they spend their time and their money on, right? And so when you are doing things, and where's all of your time and where's all of your money going, your children are going to pick up on that it's either things that are spiritual or it's things that just fulfill my own pleasures and desires. That's an important thing to remember. look at your budget and figure that out, right? Look at your time budget and figure that out, where you're spending your time.
You know, when my children were little, from a very young age, whenever we were involved with anybody with benevolence or classes, we might not have told them what some of the details were.
Sure.
But if we gave somebody a couple $100, my kids knew we gave some people a couple $100. I wanted them to know that it was real. It was important. And it made a difference. Most people don't do that with their children. They isolate them from all the financials. But what Patrick had just said.
Yeah. College.
That's right, yeah. But what Patrick was saying was, that's number one with us. We wanted them to know where our money was, where our mouths were, and this was primary for us.
Sure.
I think it makes a difference.
Okay. Other thoughts or ideas on how we can bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord? What else can we do?
Well, I'm thinking we need to look at the example of our Heavenly Father and how He treats us. And
Sure.
the grace and love that He shows us, but also He's going to treat us, discipline us, and we will go through trials, and we have to make choices, but He's always there for us. He cares about us. The motivation behind everything God does for us is love.
Yeah, there is an idea, right, that's sort of detailed out in Scripture, and it's part of why God uses that imagery, I think, of how you relate to your children, and this is why it's important for fathers especially, how you relate to your children, fathers, is how children are going to understand the analogy of the father-child relationship. And so when you say to your children, God is our heavenly Father, what you're doing is you're telling them the way I treat you is how God treats us. That's the only thing in a child's mind that they can equate that with. They don't have any sort of higher order thinking skills that they can bring to bear to say, oh, okay, that may not, no, they don't get that. When you say, our Father who's in heaven, what they mean in their minds is, however my dad treats me, that's how God treats us. And that's an important thought, because you're influencing, as they grow up, what their perception of God is. And that's serious. That's sobering. When you think about, if my kid sees out of me that I'm violent and capricious and just, do whatever I feel is best for my own self, and that I don't care about anybody else, and that you're not that important to me, that's the image they bring of what God looks like. And then they've got to sort of work through that. So that's a heavy thing. Go ahead, Joe.
Following what Laura, I think, was saying there, that what you said is, I think, key to that, but also in how we interact. One of the differences in us and God is that our interactions as Christians towards each other is we confess our faults, we forgive each other, and we have to be willing to live that out in front of our kids.
Sure.
My wife, if I can apologize to her, they see that. And if I can apologize to my kids, sometimes, I have an attitude, and I do or say something wrong.
Sure.
But I've got to be willing to approach them with humility and apologize to them.
Yep.
When I do that, take ownership of that. They learn from that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Vern.
One more thing.
Yep.
That we're talking about the relationship with God, and they see that's how God is with us. That is true with discipline as well. If we tell our children to do something and they don't do it, and we don't deal with that,
Right.
they will grow up thinking God is the same way, and they have multiple chances, and that He really doesn't care, and it's not that important.
Right.
And we need to set that example that when something is said, and it's coming from an authoritative source, which God is for us ultimately, that it is vitally important. So discipline is very important.
Yeah. I agree. And again, that's got to look a particular way, right? Because what we want kids to understand about God is that, look, God is fair, and God is just, and God is always going to do what He says He's going to do, right? I mean, that's what we want them to understand about God as a father, right? And so we need to think about that when we are trying to discipline our children. All right, we're already past 5, so I want to get to mothers real fast. Maybe we'll continue this discussion another time here. I'll figure out how this goes. But mothers, there's an interesting idea for you. This is really one of the only places we see about mothers, interestingly enough, sort of being told something. And it's in Titus chapter 2, which again we referenced. I think Vernon may have referenced it the other day, probably because he was talking about the women part. Titus 2, when you look over there, Verses 4 and 5 are kind of interesting in what it tells them. And it's really talking to older women, but what it tells them is important, because this is what they're supposed to teach the younger women. It says, teach them, that they may teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, keepers at home, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be blasphemed. So when you look at that, there is an interesting thing there that's sort of funny, right? And we mentioned a little bit when Vern was talking about the wives, that the older women are supposed to teach the younger women to love their husbands. And we talked a little about why that is. Why would you have to teach someone to love their husband? Now, what's interesting here is he also says to do what? Teach the younger to love their children. That seems weird, because what do we think about mothers and love? Oh, it's just the way they are, right? It's just a mother's love. Oh, I mean, we just think that that's the way it is, right? At least in our minds, we sometimes get that impression. But the directive here is for the older women to teach the younger women how to love their children. Now, what's interesting is he kind of follows it up with these sort of lists of things right after that some of those I think sort of apply, right? Sensible, pure, working, kind. What's it look like to love your children, mothers? It means those things, right? You got to be sensible in how you deal with them, right? And that's something you need to learn, because if I've learned anything, it's that children can make you crazy. And so it's very easy to become unsensible and just deal with them in a way that is not loving, that does not show any sense at all, right? Because it's just, that's the way children can be. You've got to learn that. When you look at these things, it says that you need to do it in a way that's pure, right? That's a qualifier on a way of how you love your children. When it says that you need to be kind to them. Again, because children are with you a lot, and because they can get you really mad and angry, and because they can be really, really unkind, it's very easy in turn to be unkind, right? That's not what we're to do, mothers. It's supposed to be that this is how you are. I'm going to ask just real quick if any of the older women have any wise insight they'd like to share with any of the younger mothers on how to do that. Since it's your directive. I'm not going to, but Tammy raised her hand, so.
She's an older woman.
So so if you're older than Tammy, feel free to jump in there.
I could tell you that what worked well with my own children is that I cared to know who they were. Just like she was talking about that book, 5 Love Languages, I applied that to my children. I have 3 children that I raised, and they were as different as could be. So a discipline that worked with one didn't necessarily work with the other. A thing that one didn't even phase one would crush one of the other ones. So learning who my children were and caring about their hearts and understanding what motivated them, understanding what discipline worked with them, and telling my children from the start, I'm going to treat you the way that will best help you become everything that you to be. And it might not look like how I treat your sister, it may not look like how I treat your other brother, but it's going to be best for you. And my children all understood that, so I never had to deal with, it's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair, because I would say, if that doesn't work for you, it works for them. From an age they can understand, and it just seemed to create a really close bond and tight relationship with my children.
Yeah, and see, I would say that qualifies as being sensible, right? Like, that makes good sense, and that young mothers should understand.
I took my kids to school and I brought them home. I turned the radio off. I let them talk. It's amazing what you'll find out. And they'll tell you everything. And they go on dates and come home and stand on the side of the bed and tell you everything. You know, because they've got that relationship with you where they could say, yeah, sometimes it was like only, and, you know, but at the same time, I heard everything. And quite honestly, I knew things that were going on in school before you met administrators.
Sure.
And so that's one of the things. Instead of turning on the radio and letting it blare, listen to your kids. And it makes a lot of difference. Also, I used to give my kids a and that out was, my mother gave it to me, and that's how I learned to do it. But what it was, you know, there was times when you knew somebody, but you knew that there were things in their life that you really didn't want to get involved with. At school, you know, if you knew somebody, it's like, hi, and then they call and say, hey, you want to go hang out? And I'd say, I don't know. Let me ask my mother. And she'd be standing there, I was going, and she'd say, no, you know. And then I was free, you know, I wasn't. But it gave me an out.
Sure. Yeah, you know, it's funny that kids will sometimes sort of appreciate that thing, right? When it's useful to them, it's part of being utilized, right? Is that I can't because my parents won't let me. When they don't want to do it, they're more than happy to say that, right? Hey, you know, if that's something where that's an appropriate thing, right? Like, don't let your kids do that if it was, oh, hey, do you want us to come, you know, and help the poor people? You know, don't let them say, oh, I can't, my parents won't let me help poor people. But you know, there should be things where you let them know, right? Hey, if you don't want to do something, if you're not comfortable doing it because you know it's not right, you feel more than free to tell them, my parents won't let me do that, right? Or if you don't feel comfortable because you just don't want to, because you don't really, my parents won't let me do that. I think it's a good option there. Good, Laura.
Also, I think that Bible principles should become more important than what is important to you.
Sure.
You may like certain manners or this and that, but God's laws were always more important in our home. It was like we will fight the battles. You know, you can't fight every battle.
Sure.
So fight the battles that God's given you to fight. Make sure they know that lying's not right, cheating, stealing, saying bad words. You know, those kind of things become more important than whether you cleaned up all the trash.
Sure, right. Those things may be important to you, but you can't fight battles over, you didn't take the trash out, if you're not going to fight battles over, you didn't tell me the truth, right? Because then you're setting the principles of, oh, those things are not important, but these things are. Because whatever you fight about, those are the kids will understand, that's what's important to mom and dad.
Being kind to one another.
Right.
You know, that is very important.
Right. Those have got to be the things that you're willing to say, we don't tolerate that, and stand up for them. If you're going to say, oh, you didn't turn the light off, or oh, you didn't clean up your room, or oh, you didn't make your bed. If you're going to fight those battles, they better understand those are less important than these other things. All right, we are out of time. I'm sure there is plenty more discussion that we could have. I'm appreciative of the comments that were made. I would encourage you two things. One, there's a reason that God put people together in a group like this. And one of those reasons is, like he's telling here in Titus, right? That the older men and the older women can teach the younger men and the younger women. Go find somebody to talk to, right? About, hey, I appreciate the way you guys are about this. Could you tell me more about that? Do that. The second thing I would say is, I think Vernon kind of mentioned it. I don't remember during whose lessons, but you know, when you, it was probably during Don's. If you're going to try and do some of these things, right, and change some of these things, you see, oh, we haven't been doing very good at some of these things, then spouses, you need to give your husband and or wife a pass on this is how we're going to do it, and honestly try and do that, not be like, well, this isn't how you've been before, this is fake, right? No, the point is, if your husband starts trying to treat you nicely and say nice things to you, don't be like, oh, you're just faking it because you were told to do that. No, assume he has good intentions and he's saying, I'm going to be better about that. I'm going to do better about those things, instead of just being like, oh, this will wear off in a week kind of a thing, right? Give them a pass on their poor behavior in the past, forgive them for that, and help them move forward if they try and implement things that they've learned here this weekend. So that's my final closing thoughts on that. Thanks for your conversation and your participation. Your past time to go, but I want you to know that was all you all who wanted to keep talking about those things. So it's not my fault. I didn't keep you late. All right? You're free to go.